Speaker for that speech. I invite leader of opposition to take inside opposition's case. Here.
Hi, give me 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay, I am starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, today we see a side government that's come up with this super idealistic idea of what AI is going to be like, right? They tell us it's going to be this perfect, all-knowing God who will never make mistakes, who will always choose to save society over the driver, and which will never glitch, never make any complications, and knows all the relevant information regarding the passengers and the driver, and can decide on its own what kind of life to save without thinking about who's doing the programming, who's behind all of this, or any of the genuine practical and legal problems that are associated with having self-driving cars make this kind of super moral decision, right? So today, I'm going to be rebutting what Thai government came up and said, and I'm also going to be, firstly, characterizing self-driving cars as a product whose primary obligation is to the customer, i.e. the driver. Secondly, telling you about the slippery slope and how AI is not equipped to arbitrarily make this kind of decide on the intrinsic value of human lives. And lastly, on the idea of legal liability and how it's opening up a can of worms that we're not prepared to deal with. And also talking about how this motion actually will encourage pedestrians to behave even more recklessly and endanger people in the long run. But before that, some rebuttals. So firstly, side government came up and told us about how AI is less selfish and more moral, and how we're sacrificing one for many, and how this benefits society in the long run, right? And how AI is the best actor to decide on who's the best life to save because they're so intelligent and they can make calculations. Well, firstly, they also told us how people are more biologically selfish and how they're likely to want to preserve themselves, right? We tell you that because people are so self-interested, because they only care about their personal safety, if self-driving cars are said to only prioritize pedestrians and prioritize society in the long run, we think that people aren't likely to want to buy this kind of self-driving car. Therefore, all of the benefits the side government identified will never materialize because people won't want this kind of car that doesn't care about their own personal safety and will decide to save some random person rather than them, the consumer, right? So none of their benefits materialize. Whereas on our side, even if AI cars choose to prioritize the safety of the driver, we think that overall AI is still a safer system and is still able to drive less recklessly than human drivers. And even if it does prioritize the safety of human drivers, in the rare cases that it makes mistakes, overall, we think we still have the benefits on the long run, right? So moving on to my points. Firstly, on the characterization of self-driving cars as a product, we tell you that as we agree with Thai government that people are intuitively selfish and they do want to save themselves. And we think that when they buy self-driving cars, they do so with the expectation that it's a commercial transaction and they are the client. Therefore, they expect the product that they buy to be beneficial to them and do things that are beneficial to them, right? We think it's very unlikely that people will choose to buy this kind of car if it is said to prioritize the number of lives saved, right? We think that there have been countless surveys regarding this problem that said that even though people said that they would want cars to prioritize social benefit, even if that was the case, then they would not buy the car, right? We think that this shows a kind of contradiction and the genuine mentality of people. So for this reason, we don't think it's practical to prioritize social benefit. Nextly, we also think that there's a very slippery slope regarding the handing over of the decision of human lives and value to AI, right? Firstly, recognize that programming AI to prioritize the number of life saves doesn't mean that it will always effectively be able to do so. Why? Because there are so many other moral and ethical complications when you have to decide what kind of lives are more valuable, right? We don't think it's always going to be such a simple utilitarian calculus of what two pedestrians versus one driver, right? What if there's one pedestrian and one driver? How does the AI decide? Is the programmer going to tell the AI, oh, you can you look at the age, you guess the age of the pedestrian versus the driver, and you decide who has more life in them, right? We don't think that this kind of decision can be made quickly and effectively by the AI in a very morally consistent or clear manner. We think that even humans find this kind of dilemma hard to resolve, but the reason why we would prefer to have humans make this kind of decision is because at least ultimately they're held morally and ethically and legally responsible for their actions. Yes, before I move on, CG.
What are the kinds of procedures this self-driving car will take to preserve the life of this individual?
Right, so we think that firstly, this kind of situation is OG's responsibility to define, but since I don't think they really had this kind of situation, as stated in the motion, I would say it would be something like, for example, if it's a decision between swerving to continuing on its course and killing two pedestrians versus swerving into a brick wall and killing the driver, then the AI would choose to continue on its current course instead of taking an action to end the life of the driver. Hope that answers your POI. So moving on to my next point about legal liability and how it opens up a can of worms that we're not prepared to cover, right? We think site government came out and told us they don't care who programs the car, right? We think that this is very irresponsible of them. They can't just say they don't care who programs it because there are lots of legal and practical issues associated with this kind of decision, right? We think that on our side, if the driver decides to swerve and kill people or decides to drive recklessly, he's held criminally liable and he can be prosecuted for example, reckless driving. On the other hand, with AI making this kind of decision, it's very legally and morally unclear who's supposed to be responsible. Is it the software developer? Is it the hardware manufacturer? Is it the AI itself? But if it is the AI itself, the AI should be seen as an individual entity, how is it punished and how is it held criminally liable? Where does the monetary compensation come from? These are all huge issues that I don't think we are equipped to deal with right now. And I think that the kind of moral issues associated with who should take the blame for this kind of action are also very legally complicated. So we think that this is kind of a can of worms that we're not equipped to deal with yet. Lastly, on my final point, we also think that it promotes reckless behavior on the side of pedestrians, right? If pedestrians know that AI self-driving cars will always prioritize the number of lives saved if they're moving in a group, then we think that it actually it means that even if pedestrians behave recklessly, they're not held responsible for their behavior and they will always be prioritized, even though the driver is innocent and they didn't do anything wrong, right? What this means is, for example, a group of 5 pedestrians will feel a lot more safe walking out in the street or jaywalking because they know that if a car comes along and is about to collide with them, then the car will prioritize their safety over the safety of the driver, right? We think that this means that people will be a lot less concerned about their safety when they're moving around on the streets and a lot less aware of road rules and safety, right? We think that this is very bad because it actually leads to reckless behavior and it endangers the driver when they didn't actually do anything wrong, right? So we think that this is kind of very morally and ethically questionable. So what have I told you today? I've given you a characterization of why self-driving cars should be obligated to protect their consumers because they are inherently a product, and also talk to you about the slippery slope, how AI is not equipped to arbitrarily decide the intrinsic value of human lives, how there's a lot of legal liability that we're not equipped to deal with, and lastly, on the practical repercussions and how it would affect the mentality of pedestrians. Because of this, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech. Invite Deputy Prime Minister to further cite opening government's case here. I thank the speaker for that speech. I invite Deputy Leader of Opposition to finish opening half of the debate here.
I'm audible.
You are, but if you could come closer to the mic, that would be nice.
Yeah, is this better?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Oh, Look, we think one fatal flaw of opening government is that they never really explain to us what the essence of what the purpose of artificial intelligence is, and they never properly explain the context of how artificial intelligence actually reached its advent today, right? We think that artificial intelligence obviously started out as trying to bring speed and convenience and trying to improve the efficiency of human living. That doesn't necessarily mean trying to play God and basically just dictating the lives and deaths of people, especially those that are not even privy to those decisions in the first place. We don't necessarily think that they properly laid the justification for why AI can suddenly achieve that sort of responsibility. And we don't think that given the present conditions, especially the technological constraints, they can't fiat that they can ensure success of this policy. We think that is precisely why they fail. But a few strategic observations that we have to make before going on to rebuttals. A, we think they never really properly explained what the actor is in today's debate, right? We think that opens up two problems. A, they never really explained what the liability or the moral culpability should go to, right? Because they never really explained who is going to program these self-driving cars. Is it going to be the government? Is it going to be a government mandate? Is it going to be private firms and then releasing the technology for free for some reason, which they never explained? So we don't think that they can just come out and fiat that, oh, it's going to be an open access, and even if one private firm like Tesla achieves that technology, Elon Musk will suddenly open it up to everyone for free and not become profit oriented, which is very obvious and very straightforward, right? We don't see how that is not intuitive. Secondly, again, we already told you that they can't fiat the success of this policy. We think that's very important because that notes that all the benefits that they want are only potentially at best. They don't necessarily materialize in all cases. We don't think those constructive benefits actually come out most of the time. Thirdly, we think the most important thing to recognize here is this. If AI can wander into, for example, Matthew's domino car crash situations on the highway, odds are its computations and estimations are far from flawless, right? So why should we necessarily give them the benefit of the doubt when these erroneous calculations don't necessarily lead to the idealistic scenario from OG, but also ascertain the deaths of the innocent driver or perhaps even his family inside the vehicle? Because if it's so bad, the technology is so flawed that it can actually rush into these situations, then also it doesn't necessarily do what it does, even if it tries to escape or avoid killing even more people, right? So we don't think that they can have the best of both worlds and say, sure, I'll wander dangerously into the situation, but then perform miraculous human touch and escape. I don't think that works. Fourthly, they never really gave us a model, right? We think given how this is a policy debate, we never really saw the mechanism. So being very high-handed and saying, oh, they're all for the people and we're not for Tesla doesn't really mean they can cover up their lack of a mechanism. We don't think that works. But lastly, we think the most important thing is all of their benefits are based on utilitarianism, right? They never explained to us why utilitarianism is absolute, and I'll tell you exactly why that's not the case. Let's go to some rebuttals. Look, basically what Matthew said was that, oh, AI is more rational than human beings. And because of that extra level of rationality, we should therefore give AI self-driving cars this privilege. Note that OG never explained exactly what rationality means, right? We think that is rationality even possible to be emulated as an intrinsic human trait that is known to be very abstract and nebulous, right? So how are you going to model rationality into AI? But secondly, if this artificial rationality is the input by programmers that are obviously human beings themselves, so what gives them this monstrous privilege, also responsibility to play God and as a relevant third party dictate others' lives and death positions, right? We don't see how they really explain this. We don't see how these mechanics or these programmers suddenly have that extra sort of responsibility that they deserve or probably they afford. But thirdly, and then we think that when they said, oh, for example, Jane said, oh, most countries have pedestrians having the right of way, and therefore pedestrians are always superior to drivers. We don't see how that works. Yeah, sure, they have the right of way in terms of how it's a very slow situation and cars should generally let pedestrians go, but that doesn't necessarily translate into pedestrians being reckless and pedestrians jaywalking everywhere, but still having the right of way, right? We don't think that makes for a very safe traffic condition. Traffic condition anyway, because in that case, sure, a lot of people are going to be saved, but also a lot of innocent civilians are going to be killed because of reckless pedestrians walking into the streets. So we don't think this submissive rebuttal actually works anyway. More importantly, know the comparative in today's case, right? Basically, when Jane talks about legal liability, we think the point is this. Under their side, they basically have these drivers, AI drivers, opting into the contract, but getting killed for no reason, right? When they, for example, buy this AI car that has this policy. But on our side, if an individual purchases an AI vehicle in the status quo, but doesn't have this rule, at least, sure, it takes on the associated risk and the legal liability, but then it doesn't open up a new can of worms in terms of assigning the legal culpability. This problem only arises in their case. It's not a wash. Please don't make it sound like it is. So let's go into the sales problem, right? They try to say, oh, practically sales won't be affected because it actually promotes the reputation. Note that humans are intrinsically self-oriented, right? I think that's more than intuitive. We think that given how they've never really explained the actor in this debate, that's even worse, because that means, for example, they can't ensure open access, and they can't even ensure that there won't be discrepancies between different vehicles, right? So for example, there might be higher quality algorithms and lower quality algorithms between different firms. And even if one firm has a technology and the other firms don't, guess who's going to buy which car, right? Obviously, people are going to opt for these AI cars that at least don't prioritize killing themselves over those that one firm that prioritizes killing other people and trying to be the hero, because humans are intrinsically selfish, right? So we think that when you don't even include a government mandate, and given how humans' nature is inherently selfish, we think that if you're that convinced of your moral outcomes, that's just a very weird policy outcome to vouch for an OG. But note that we think that the development of AI, given how like it's been like going very rapid in recent years, we think that you basically deter like the future developments and you deter the R&D funding given this given this new policy, right? We think that given how AI is supposed to improve human efficiency, but now you basically say that to the owner that, oh sure, it's gonna kill you sometime, we don't know when, but if it calculates wrongly, then you might be like subject to death. Obviously, that's not a very convincing message, and that's not very reassuring, right? We think as individuals, you instantly get turned off by this. We don't think that's in the long run, it's conducive to an environment where AI is like continuing to become more and more popular. We don't think that we want that in this case. So why exactly do we think utilitarianism isn't absolute? I think it's very clear. Utilitarianism is not absolute in the sense that we can't always say that, oh, you prioritize the society over the individual. If the trade-offs are completely like very straightforward, then sure. The thing is this, we think OG needs to explain, and we hope CG will explain to us. For example, are you going to have an AI, for example, like, and get all, are you going to remove all money rich individuals? We do an AI, for example, just kill random individuals because they deem them, according to an algorithm, to be like criminally dangerous, right? Sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you when you started arguing for how utilitarianism is not an absolute metric. If you can start from there again, I'm really sorry.
Sure.
But I don't want to like.
Yeah, of course, of course. Can you just tell me around what time would that be?
It was like 5 seconds ago. You were beginning with respect to how utilitarianism can't be the absolute metric because sure, sometimes societies prioritize it, but it is not.
Okay, sure. Yeah, okay, that's okay. Thanks. I'll begin now. So my point is, we think utilitarianism isn't always an absolute like metric, right? We think that sure, you can prioritize the society over individuals generally in very obvious situations. The thing is, would you have AI play God and, for example, remove all the money and assets from rich individuals because they think it will produce like more overall good, for example, for poor individuals? Would you have an AI like kill people that they deem to be like generally criminally dangerous because of an algorithm, even though it's obviously subject to erroneous calculations and estimations, right? We don't think that given the present level of technological constraints, you can just let AI think it can do whatever it does because it always is the best judge of human living. It's always the best judge of like human good and bad in society, right? We haven't achieved that level of technological capacity. And before that, we don't think that the moral culpability issues and the problem of practical consequences of deterring AI is actually worth it. We think OG has never even mechanized any sort of policy model. We think that is completely abhorrent, very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I invite member of GOV to begin closing hub debate. Here.
Hi, give me a second here. We think we're at a crucial point where AI isn't perfect just yet. Oftentimes, it has a lot of problems or has a lot of weakness when it comes to the functionality of self-driving cars. Things like it not being able to maneuver when it comes to rainy roads or like stormy weathers. Things like there's a huge risk of it malfunctioning. Things like when you program AI, it's oftentimes when you program self-driving cars, it's oftentimes programmed to prioritize rules and regulations, and it can't rationally calculate then swerving or breaking the rule when it comes to saving more lives or saving or making the right decisions. There's a large risk when it comes to AI or self-driving cars, and there is and it doesn't mean, and statistics have showed that it just isn't safe yet, and the risk of accidents or malfunctioning is high. Given this, I think there's still a lot of need for like the technology to grow and continuously improve itself. But I think that the point at which someone chooses to buy a self-driving car within the market, we think that they consent to a lot of harms that comes with the technology, which is still risky and still not perfect when it comes to the testing of the algorithm. But secondly, we think that the very fact that they're able to consent to this means that they have made a trade-off when it comes to either safety or convenience. I think a lot of times these are individuals who are techies who like prioritize their convenience or prioritize the new technology, and we think that the point at which they still choose to purchase the self-driving car, it is a trade-off between safety and convenience that they make, and we don't think the rest of society or passengers who will inevitably be more harmed when it comes to self-driving cars, simply because self-driving cars cannot compute prioritizing a passenger that suddenly comes in front of the car, or a blind or a child running past the car. The AI isn't able to compute this, and when self-driving cars come into the market, passengers will be inevitably harmed more, and hence we think that the driver should be able to take the harm simply because they're able to consent to it. First, before that, several responses. The first thing they say is that apparently the AI is a product and has an obligation to the customer. I think that on our, the first mechanism that we propose is that we are willing to give the customer a briefing or like some mandatory explanations as to all the risks of the AI, and if the customer still chooses to purchase this, I think this is some level of consent on when it comes to their part, and if they still choose to purchase a risky product, then it's their wish. The second thing they say is that, and I find this extremely absurd, and it's a large part of their case, that apparently pedestrians will become more reckless. Realize that it's just a comparative when it comes to their world. There is still a large risk of the passenger being or the pedestrian being harmed. It's just the scale of the harm when it comes to like trying to save their life or minimize the harm. But just the mere fact of that you might be hit by a car, given not calculating the harm, is already enough of a deterrence to anyone to not be reckless. I think people just have an intrinsic fear within themselves that they're going to be hit, and even though the scale is less, I just don't think people are going to take that risk anyways. People will still want to like prioritize safety, and those who don't, I think their ignorance will just continuously be there on both worlds. But a majority of people still have an innate deterrence within themselves, so I don't think this occurs. But before that, POI.
Look, it is illogical to say that people consent to malfunctions, which is why in every case of malfunction, companies retract those cars and provide compensation for any damages incurred. How is it that people can consent to these things on your behalf?
Yeah, so we tell them that there's a larger risk of malfunction when it comes to self-driving cars, and then if they want to purchase it because they're willing to make the trade-off that at some points they will not be in control, that the self-driving cars will make those decisions for them. I still think that that is something that people are smart enough to be able to comprehend in their heads, knowing that they will not be in control and there is a risk of malfunction. If they still choose to opt into it, then it's something that they opt into. The third thing they say is that, and this is also a large part of their case, that how is the self-driving car going to compute the lives? I think that firstly, we can just have mechanisms where it has like a light in front of them where they're able to like or calculate the number of lives of the passenger. It has like a mirror or something like that where they're able to see the amount of lives that are being lost on the other side, and basically like have mechanisms like things like the way in which they swerve, etc., to be able to prioritize the lives on the other side and not inside. And this is a weird part. They say that how are they going to guess the age, etc., like who has more life in it? I think that realize that it's not about the person in front, but it's just the number of the people and the lives of the passengers that they're being saved. The last thing they say is that there's apparently a lot of ambiguity when it comes to like legal mechanisms and who are we going to hold accountable. This is a problem we face anyways in society, so I think that on both worlds we will still hold the driver accountable because they chose to take that harm anyways, and they chose to harm other people when they bought the car. Moving on to my extension. One, why are we okay if individuals purchase less self-driving cars, or why is that a harm we're willing to take? I think that now when individuals realize that self-driving cars is just extremely dangerous, they will wait for the technology to become better. So yes, if there's less demand now, that's fine, because the demand will, companies know that they have to continuously improve the algorithms and make it far more like susceptible to accidents and not face accidents. They have to like continuously improve so that individuals know that the risk is lower and lower because they know that their lives will be harmed. I think there's more lobbying, or just there's more pressure on companies to improve the technology because people won't take the risk otherwise, because their lives will be harmed most. I think that secondly, it's okay if we trade off the current for the future
pressure that companies will have to face to continuously improve the technology because people aren't going to make the trade-off. But secondly, why do the innocent pedestrians on the road have less of a safety mechanism as opposed to the driver? In a lot of times when it comes to road accidents, the passengers, the pedestrian or the person on the outside of the car is always harmed more, simply because they have less of a safety mechanisms. In a car, in any car, a person oftentimes has things like airbags, has the exterior of the car, has the car itself has like the hard exterior, airbags, a seat belt, all these things which protect the person from any harm. In that scenario where you come in an accident, I think that the innocent child running across the road or the blind man has just no safety mechanisms or no exterior, and you just aren't prepared for the harm, whereas you in the car always are able to compute that is a harm, and I think that you're far more effective when it comes to fighting against this. Hence, I think that it's not just about being a utilitarian metric, but the mere fact that you consented to these harms and have far more safety mechanisms to protect you. The innocent pedestrian deserves more rights and safety. Proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for that speech. Invite member of opposition here. Okay.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Yeah,
All right.
loud and clear.
Panel, I think that all of the teams in this debate have roughly agreed that self-driving cars are beneficial, but they've realized they fail to understand that the prerequisite for any of the benefits that any team wants to list here is that the automation industry and the self-driving industry must be one that is viewed favorably and must be one that can continue to grow. We agree with opening houses. We have to prioritize society, but the opening houses have been far too narrow in their realization. The largest benefit to society is the millions of lives that automation can save and self-driving cars can save. The millions of drunk drivers that no longer get into car accidents, the millions of people who are disabled that can now drive cars. We say the most primary benefit to the most vulnerable in society is allowing self-driving cars to become cheaper over time through a growing industry and a larger industry. Let's respond to closing government. Closing government's argumentation was insane. They listed a huge amount of harm about self-driving cars, questioning the feasibility of it. We asked them then, would you even allow self-driving cars in their world? How is it that you would continue to allow this to be legal? If there are so many harms and you allow the exceptions to these harms, all of your benefits are never true. All of your harms continue to persist. We say improvement can never happen without R&D. If CG concedes that they are willing to allow everybody to stop buying these cars until they get better, we say these cars are never going to get better. They're just merely going to go out of like style, right? There's no opportunity for you to improve your technology if there's no one buying your cars. Thank you to opening government for telling us a laundry list about why people prioritize themselves. I think they're out of this debate for not realizing that the only people that can buy these cars are the same people who are self-interested in themselves. And also thank you for the opening opposition for their missing engagement. We are going to be the first house in this debate that's going to tell you that even if it were possible for this car to save more lives in an accident or an accident scenario, why is it then still wrong? I think that we have 2 points for you today. First thing about why our primary duty to the programmer is to the consumer, and the second thing about how it destroys automation and how we ought to keep it around. First thing about what's the primary duty of the programmer to the consumer. We have to realize that this is a point that clashes with opening government's direct material on why individuals need to prioritize other individuals, and it also clashes with closing government's material on why exactly we are willing to trade off individuals who are in front of the car and not inside the car. First thing, it is not a burden to defend net lives in this debate. By virtue of the motion, the net lives in a specific accident is always going to be on government sides of the house. We defend the lives that you enter that contract with, the lives that you actually pay for the car with, for 3 reasons, right? So first thing is the promise of safety and the right to consumer choice. So the appeal of driving cars is towards the driver. It's about preventing human errors, accounting for things like fatigue, of muscle pain, of being drunk and potentially having to drive. We say those are benefits that you guarantee to the consumer. The second thing is you are monetarily indebted to the people that buy your cars. So your fortunes as a company is indebted to anybody that risks buying your cars. Your ability as a programmer to achieve your dream of programming cars is based on your consumers being able to buy those cars. And the third thing is, we think that government framework already understands that you have a right of self-defense. Individuals in the government don't ask you to give up your life for other people, because the principal right of self-defense is still something that individuals appreciate. We say these are three legal concepts that opening opposition never wanted to give you about why consumers deserve to maintain their right to be able to protect themselves. Second point about how it destroys the capital of automation. Opening government is right. You are self-interested, but opening opposition doesn't sufficiently tell you why individuals are self-interested and the incentives that work. I'm going to tell you that they will never buy this. A first thing to understand is that automation is progressing fast, but the only way it can progress fast is because the elites in the world have been able to buy it. It has never been able to go down to the trickle down to the individuals on the ground, the commoners who deserve to be able to access automation as well. We say they'll never buy this for three reasons. Number one, it stops becoming an asset, particularly when closing government tells you that we are willing to sue the driver for the deaths that it may not even have occluded to. If individuals run onto the road and you are getting sued for the deaths that you occluded to, we say that is a harm, that is a liability. But also individuals buy things to solve their problems, right? We say that the additional harm or the risk of you dying because of this is a problem that you add on. It's a liability. You won't pursue it. Second thing, individuals are self-interested. So it doesn't matter how much I want a Tesla. I'm not going to buy it the first moment that I hear someone of a driver dying. If you can't even do it clandestinely, right? So if every 100 cases where there's a Tesla car involved and the driver always dies, why then would the statistics in my brain allow me to buy that car? But the third thing is, as a human being, you always imagine the worst scenarios. So you're not going to imagine the instances where it was you at fault. You imagine the instances where the bunch of people run onto the road and then you get sued because that is somehow your fault, right? I'm not going to buy this car. We also think that it feeds into the stigma that machines are crazy. I don't agree with opening opposition when they tell you that machines don't have the calculus to be able to act, or other houses. We say machines do have a certain benefit in society, but is this exact kind of rhetoric that tells you that machines are something to be feared, that machines should be excluded from society? So then, why is it that automation helps the most vulnerable, and why is it that we ought to keep it? This is also something that opening opposition never explained about why automation is necessary and why it's the only alternative to growth in this society. So the two reasons for you here. First thing, I think that we prevent the downward spiral of prices when you have a larger industry. So when you have a smaller industry and less individuals willing to buy your product, that ultimately means that your product cannot grow, that you cannot get cheaper parts for your product. You cannot get R&D to invest in different items for your product. The key problem here is that automation can save lives. So the problem is that millions of individuals who were blind, who didn't have arms or legs, individuals who had anxiety, could now input their addresses into their cars and go to the locations that they wanted to. You have liberated individuals from being dependent on other individuals, from stigmas of not having to be able to drive at all, right? What is the harm of this? So without the money that you can gain from this, if CG's model is that you're not going to have a reduction, we say that even if it's a 20% reduction, it is still money that you can't spend into three different areas. First area, R&D. If you can't invest into a car, you also can't innovate new parts to make that car cheaper, to get Tesla to make the cars cheaper for other individuals. But the second thing is marketing. For all of the houses' reasonings of how they're so scared of automations, we have to be able to market our product to politicians to be able to allow this kind of thing in the house, right? To get into mainstream media. The third thing is the cheaper advent of parts allows the liberation of individuals to be able to go to places anywhere else. This is something that closing opposition brings you specifically and uniquely. The comparative is you're going to get sued either house and you're not going to buy these cars in the first place. If it's the company's liability, the company gets sued and can't get the kind of money to R&D. If it's your liability, you won't buy the car and the company still can't get the money to be able to improve their products. You may be evaluating complexities that don't even exist for you. So if you are someone who is a pregnant woman, society already views you as more special than probably two 70-year-old men. Why then is utilitarianism somehow a metric that accounts for every single instance? Side with closing opposition.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I invite GovWhip to finish side government's case here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. It's said that the only lines of argumentation from both opposition houses never wanted to contest with the bulk of material that came out from the government benches, especially from CG. When we told you about the net lives you save, but the only argument they want to bring to you is that, oh, number one, you have a duty to the customer, and therefore you should kill other people at the expense of saving the customer in the first place. And number two is R&D and the company's incentive to want to become better in the first place. We think these are arguments that don't directly clash. If you think about it logically as an average reasonable person, which incentives matter more? The lives that you save on the side of closing government, or the incentives of companies and your duty to the customer just by virtue of being the person that bought the car? We think it's clear that side of closing government edges out in the debate, but we'll clarify to you why, and we'll engage with the other houses in this debate. But we've fought at several levels of character, some levels of clearing up the debate. We think side closing opposition can't only operate in the world or only want to talk in the context in the future where the car exists and it's perfect, when both opposition houses wanted to tell you how flawed it is currently. This means none of their arguments, apart from the R&D, which we'll get to later, can stand. They are the side that wants blind people, disabled individuals to be operating a car. Whether or not it self-drives doesn't matter, but if they also want to concede that it's currently flawed in society, this means that the point at which it messes up, the point at which you have to manually drive, how then are you going to do it? We think there's a very clear reason why we don't let you drive on the first place. We don't think it's a problem that you're dependent. We think your very disability means you need to have the assistance, the point at which you fall out of the parking lot, for example. We don't think giving them this false sense of dependence is a benefit they can co-opt on the side of closing opposition. What happens then when you park your car as an individual that needs crutches, but you drop your crutch when you're leaving the car? Where's that assistance then? You're going to have to rely on an outside altruistic individual to step in, and in instances where it's not there, assuming the car doesn't even malfunction or you need to take over manually, that is instances in which you're prone to die or you're going to have to be stranded in the very first place. We don't think, or we completely refute closing opposition's extension, whether or not it's new. We don't think it's valuable to tell us how we liberate disabled people. We don't think they should be given the opportunity to operate a giant vehicle that can literally kill multiple lives by virtue of the way they drive in the first place. No, I'll take one later. Dealing with side of opening opposition, they wanted to mainly talk about the slippery slope of legal liability. Notice the difference or the comparative that exists in both worlds. On their side, the AI will literally crash into the 5 pedestrians on the street. You're still going to be held liable. Or the whole thing that they wanted to talk to you about how are we going to hold the AI or the individual accountable, is the very same symmetrical problem that will happen on opening opposition, because the AI will take an active choice to hit 5 people instead of swerving to the left to avoid them. We think this moral parallel that will exist in the legal system is the very same in both scenarios. It is completely negligent in this debate. Then secondly, they told you how it is a slippery slope for morality. We think, number one, we've told you on our side, it's not hard to distinguish the number of lives. You can have an infrared camera installed in the front of the car to detect the number of bodies currently in front of you, the likelihood of computational errors to just determine there are 5 people in front of you, and then swerving to the left to avoid them. These are instances in which we don't understand why the algorithm will inevitably fail in these sorts of circumstances. And then on closing opposition, number one, we already told you why it's insufficient for them to, the levels of arguments they brought to you is insufficient in proving to you why this outweighs anything that we said on closing government. But what have they also then told you? That they want societal's growth in the first place. We think we have to look at it from a net benefit. And this is where we also claim what OG said on the utilitarian metric. We didn't just tell you that because of primarily and only due to utilitarianism, we have to prioritize these lives. We've told you several extra layers that only tell you why this argument is especially important instead of closing government. We told you, number one, as a driver, you have safety mechanisms. You have an airbag, you have a hard exterior that will protect you in the instance in which you swerve to the left and collide with a wall. Number two, we then question on the side of opposition, what are the intrinsic harms, or will you die in those instances when you prioritize other people's life? We think merely swerving to the left and hitting hitting the wall may result in a larger injury. Maybe you break an arm, for example, but you need to tell us why you're inevitably going to die in those circumstances, why these safety mechanisms that currently exist are unable to protect you. Then we told you from my first speaker in closing government, why then we have to prioritize the lives of individuals you're going to hit inevitably, or we have to minimize the amount of people we hit in these instances, because these are people that have no consent to the harms in the first place, individuals that have no safety mechanisms in the very get-go, before I'm unsure.
So let's be real, right? When this collision happens, self-driving cars are like to obey the rules, which means the individuals who are harmed on a net are people who disobeyed the rules, maybe rushed the green light, maybe pedestrians who went and ran out on the street. In the current legal framework, you don't even impose legal liability upon a driver who did that. Why is equivalent to literally merging the driver in the from the perspective of a programmer?
Two responses to this. Number one, we hold individuals liable. If you hit a pedestrian and you kill this individual, you hold them liable for the bodily damage that you cause to them. It's not true that you're going to get off scot-free just because you were in the right of way. You're still held liable under the legal circumstances. Number two, is there only line of argumentation to tell you that, oh, I accidentally jaywalked, or for all you know, there are different externalities. What if the traffic light said it was green and I walked? By virtue of just accidentally jaywalking or being illegal, does this constitute killing an individual 100%? They also want to tell you that why we're willing to trade off the life of this individual. We told you on our side, we're not willing to take that as our worst case scenario. We think in instances, these are individuals that are able to live in these circumstances, but maybe with more severe like injuries, maybe they break an arm or a rib. We see several levels of infrastructure within roads, for example, to prevent this. So in instances where you collide with your wall, oftentimes in sharp corners, they have cylindrical blocks. So when you hit the wall, it slides your car, for example, to minimize the impact of damage in the very first place. We don't think it instantaneously equates to you dying in every sort of circumstance. But number three, and largely contesting whether or not you have the principal right to self-preservation at the expense of other individuals' lives. We think you don't have the principal right to this, the point which you make an active choice to harm these individuals that are innocent in and of itself. We think when you're choosing to actively prioritize yourself, these are circumstances in which it doesn't work in your favor. But lastly, we think this AI can also work in the favor of the driver. So in instances where you're the driver and you're a family of 5, and there's one pedestrian that's apparently illegally walking, the AI will then prioritize you. The AI will then prioritize saving your family in these sorts of instances. We think on a net, we think we have a society, and notice that society would rather have notice that everyone could be at the short end of the stick, and large amounts of society would rather want in instances where they might get hit, where they are prioritized and not hit in the first place.
Hey, Josh, I'm so sorry. Is it okay if I use the toilet for a quick second?
Yeah, sure. I thank the
Thank you.
speaker for that speech, and we all wait for the guy to come back from the toilet. Here.
Sorry, Josh, just wanted to let you know you're still sharing your screen.
Thank you for that.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, you are.
All right, cool. Thank you. Okay. In 3, 2, 1. I'm really confused by the side of closing government, because their problem statement is that these cars malfunction so much that they actually incur a lot of deaths. But in the same breath claim an infrared camera is somehow able to help them gain this mass benefit of saving a net amount of lives. That simply cannot be the case. This debate has to assume some level of functionality for SDCs as a whole in order for any side to have a debate at all. Second thing I don't get from the other side of the house is that there are a lot of mitigatory mechanisms such as airbags, such as the cylinders on the street. I would propose that if these things exist, and this debate doesn't assume that if these things exist, the SDC in and of itself will probably prioritize those mechanisms because they don't sacrifice any life at all. The emotion necessitates them to take a trade-off on viewing utilitarianism in this debate. Closing government ran away from their burden. We think that's why they're primarily out as a whole. First thing in this debate is clarity on what the collision will look like. Because no, everybody has moral rhetoric in this debate, but no side grounded it with the real world as to how the legal aspect of the world works, whether you prosecute drivers as a whole, or whether in other instances, do people actually prioritize utilitarianism? That was the first extension that came from Jerome that no one responded to. What then will the collision look like? I think OG's characterization is heavily unnuanced, so is closing governments. This bus coming on the opposite side is not an accurate depiction. Note specifically that if SDCs are functional and all sides agree that SDCs were created to maintain a level of road safety that's far greater than humans because they don't have human error. For example, A, not speeding, B, not going over the limit, B, C, not literally rushing down an orange light, not stopping and using long range sensors to detect cars before crossing, for example. All this necessarily means that the probability of the collision happening is one that's not in the fault of the driver or the SDC in the first place. What then does that mean? This means the collisions that would probably happen are in cases where there are things in which the SDC cannot predict, which means someone else was violating the rules. For example, other human drivers driving out of junctions without looking on their sides before they cross, people rushing orange and red lights. We think in all these cases, there are two things to note. A, in the legal world without SDCs, if you're a driver that end up crashing with individuals, for example, and hurting them or even taking their life, you don't incur any legal liability at all. Everyone said you do. No, you don't. You maybe get brought to the court of law, but the moment in which you prove that that individual was the one that violated the rule of the road, that is when you escape legal liability, and that is when you are let free. More specifically, this means that even if you're driving it yourself, you are not held to any legal liable sense at all. So we question as to why would closing government and opening government sanction the literal murder of innocent individuals in this specific case? Their examples are unnuanced. The highway is the case where you're unlikely to face any of these problems at all. It has speed limits. Your car will follow that. The roads are so freaking wide, and it is literally a straight road for miles and miles on. Accidents primarily happen at junctions when people don't follow the rules of the white box, where people speed through traffic lights. We think that's when the context of this debate happens. But why is this important then? Because it grounds our moral rhetoric as to why it is justified for you to not sacrifice the individual who is driving or not sacrifice the SDC in and of itself. Because it was never your fault, and the legal system recognized that as a whole. Second question then on utilitarianism, and is this an absolute? We don't think it's what opening opposition talked about, which is the idea that, oh guys, you cannot let AI play God. No, we don't expect people to have positive enforcement upon obligations to other people. In times of crisis, self-preservation is the primary principle all policies rest upon. For example, in airlines, when a plane suffers a crash or a malfunction, the safety net is the safety vest, for example. Maybe if you're unlucky and the plane didn't restock everything, if you have one underneath your seat, you're not required to give that out to another individual who maybe is younger than you and therefore has a net longer time to live. You still prioritize yourself in that specific instance. But if you're a parent of a child, for example, you are told to prioritize yourself and put on your safety equipment first before you even try helping the child, and you are forced to sacrifice in that specific case, sacrifice the child in a specific case in the worst case scenario, because society recognizes that you are therefore more important in a specific sense. Just because the child has a longer net amount of life to live, that doesn't give the child any greater advantage or greater obligation towards other individuals. Point being, in the real world, people respect the kinds of direct obligations they have to themselves, and they respect the sense of self-preservation they have. If the people we have identified that is creating the collision are people that broke the law in the very first place, there was no contest upon this by any side of side government, we will question as to why we need to prioritize individuals in that debate. All the mitigations they gave us to, oh, maybe you only break an arm and break a leg and therefore compare the harm of that person losing their life, is not nuanced at all, because we told you that if you had that many mitigatory mechanisms, the car would probably prioritize that as well on our side of the house. This society in the current world literally doesn't have good Samaritan laws enacted all around the world. Even if you can swim, you aren't forced to jump into a river to save 5 people from drowning, because the legal rule recognizes that you aren't at fault for the deaths of those individuals. We think the main problem inside government is they never recognize the legal functions of society within the status quo. That is their problem. Before I move on, any from opening? Closing.
Recognize
Yes,
that
from
I-
opening. Yes. Why do you think you would allow people to invest in oil futures and shorting stocks and bungee jumping even when they have the possibility of dying?
Yeah, because they consent to it. We think the moment in which A, you let people consent by literally writing in a contract, you will die in a case of collision, they won't buy it, you don't get any of your benefits. But B, if you hide it away, then people don't consent to it, it is therefore not their fault. Which is why the moment in which you go bungee jumping, you literally have to sign away your life, dude. Like literally, that isn't a clarification that we got from your side of the house at all. Second, on the main extension, which is the whole idea of how you actually cripple the automotive industry as a whole. All sides agree that automation is generally very good because it literally prevents human error. Closing down was very convenient. They took us at our worst, this poor blind people example. That wasn't the main case. The main case was that automation is generally better at humans than humans when it comes to doing things like driving because they negate a lot of human errors. There was the drunk driving, there was the fatigue and muscle cramps that Jerome told you that Evan did not respond to. Under this case, all sides agree that automated cars are generally better and should be adopted in society. The problem with the entire bench of side government is that they never proved a proper roadmap to how this adoption will occur, considering all of their cases are premised upon the benefits of SDCs in the first place. If no one adopts SDCs, then why then would you have any benefit at all on your side of the house? We would propose, and on our side, you don't just create a world that people don't opt into SDCs, you also worsen the capital for SDCs as a whole. Because the rhetoric we have against automation in the status quo is that computing and AI in general views humans not as human lives which are valuable in and of themselves, but as mere numbers on a screen and as mere cogs in a machine. That's the entire narrative you sacrifice on your side of the house. When you literally betray, for example, the duty people have when the corporation sold them a car, like literally Volvo's main promise why it gains large amounts of market share within the status quo is because they promise that by 2020, no one in their cars will ever die from an accident ever again. That is a form of consent that allows people to buy into these kinds of technology in the very first place. You prevent that buy-in. And that buy-in has a lot of trickle-down harms that Jerome explicitly analyzed. You get less R&D funds, you get less capital, you get less ability to impose it upon the legal road and have it adopted within status quo. We think only on our side of the house, without with the legal aspect of these deaths, and without with the proper roadmap as to how we better allow for the adoption of SDCs. Very proud to oppose.